of the old apple tree.
Welcome to Everything You Need to Know. Well, it might not be everything there is to know, but for today it is everything that you need to know. And you can see we are going to be chatting about apples. Apples are one of the world's most popular fruits. Versatile, different tasting, different kinds. So grand. They, of course, grow on a great big tree, and they started in Central Asia, over there in Europe. We know apples as being high in fiber, but they're also high in vitamin C and a couple of different antioxidants like we've chatted about in the past. So we're going to chat about that today. If you've ever enjoyed an apple, hopefully you found that it is quite filling when we eat it. But the calorie count, not that we usually count calories, but if we look at that total, it's quite low. So that is where our fiber comes in. So that's why we always attribute apples to being high in fiber, as they are. So when we look at nutrition information about an apple, we have the fact that they are low or moderate in carbohydrate, I guess, because when we eat this, there's no protein. There's no fat. There's only that third macronutrient, that carbohydrate that's in that apple. So we have about 13, 14. Some, like the Granny Smith here, will be a little bit lower because they're not as sweet. The Honeycrisp will be a little bit higher, especially when we get a Honeycrisp apple that size. That's going to be more than one serving. It might be more than 2 servings. Because a serving of apple is how much? A half a cup. You got it. So a half a cup, I'm thinking that you might get 2.5 servings out of that one. But because it is even sweeter, it might have a little bit higher carbohydrate. But 1/2 of a cup is equal to 1 choice in your grains category in Canada's Food Guide. And then we've got about, depending on the apple, 3 to 5 grams of fiber in that one apple. And that's fantastic because when we're looking at our intake for the day and all we need is 25, then that's a good chunk out of our 25 to start with one apple in the morning. So the other great thing about apples is that yes, they're made up of carbohydrates, but because the fiber's so high, the glycemic index, the GI value, is low. And what that means is when we eat an apple, the time frame it takes to get the sugar broken down and then absorbed into the bloodstream is actually really slow, and that's a good thing. We don't want it eaten and absorbed right away really fast, like things like candies or honey would be absorbed really quickly. We don't want that because then that spikes our blood sugar and our pancreas has to shoot out all this insulin to go grab this sugar and store it. But apples, their sugar gets absorbed slowly, so then it keeps us full longer, it keeps our blood sugar more level, and so a glycemic index being low is a really good thing, and so you'll find that in apples because of that fiber. So outside of fiber, apples have polyphenols. So we've talked about this before because polyphenols are a type of antioxidant, and we know that antioxidants are compounds in foods that aren't a macronutrient, protein, fat, or fiber, or protein, fat, or carb, and they're not a vitamin or mineral. They're those other crazy things in foods that help to protect against all of those chronic diseases that we're hoping to avoid. The polyphenols, or the antioxidants that are in the apples, are quercetin, and then the other thing is pectin, and that's part of the fiber. But quercetin is the major antioxidant found, and that is where a lot of the health benefits come from. It's got a lot of anti-inflammatory properties. We've talked about that before. When our body is trying to fight something off, or it's got something in the gut that it doesn't like, it becomes inflamed and it gets angry, and different parts of our body can get inflamed or have an inflammation or inflammatory response. So quercetin in the apples helps to lower that inflammatory response, helps to bring the body back to functioning as well as it can. So that is a wonderful thing to have in an apple. The other thing that is very beneficial is that pectin. So pectin is a type of soluble fiber. So think of like oatmeal. We often talk about the fiber in oatmeal. That's also soluble. And so that helps to absorb the water in our stool so that when the stool is going through, it helps to prevent that constipation. And it also helps to prevent colon cancer, but it also helps to lower our bad cholesterol, that LDL. So the one really great thing about pectin, what it does in the colon, is that pectin, we can't break it down up in our digestive system up here. When it gets to the colon, it's still pectin. And guess who eats it in the colon? It's all of that microorganisms in our gut. That is food. Fiber is food for our gut. So our gut is happy when it gets fed, right? So when we're eating apples, we're feeding our gut pectin, and then those good probiotics that are in there, they can grow and multiply and be happy and keep us and our bowels happy and healthy. So that is another fantastic part of apples. So quercetin and then the pectin that's in them as well. Those are the two polyphenols. So I guess we can say that eating an apple a day can keep the doctor away because of that quercetin being anti-inflammatory and because of that pectin feeding our gut microbiota. That's going to keep our body really, really healthy. We know that we can do a lot of things with apples, ranging from just eating them fresh to using them at snack time and cutting them up and adding things to them. 2 different food groups for snack time, right? And then we can use them in recipes and we can cook them down. And then we can just use them by themselves and make applesauce. So eating the actual apple fresh, non-changed, is the healthiest way to do it because then you're not losing any of the vitamins and minerals through any heat or processing. And always, always eat the skins. We can't always get fresh in-season apples, right? Because the season for apples is the fall, September, October, and that's when they're ready to come off the trees. And then after that, they're just in storage. So you can kind of see a shininess on these apples. And apples don't come off the tree super shiny. But what happens is they need to be stored because these apples, if they're local, they aren't fresh right now. These were, picked September, October, and then they were stored in cold storage and they get sprayed with a thin layer of edible wax. And the wax keeps the oxygen from getting into the apple to allow it to continue to ripen. Because we've seen what happens when we leave an apple out on a counter in a warm weather, it starts to go all wrinkly, it starts to lose its moisture. So that wax covering keeps the moisture in and helps to keep your apple as moist as possible and to prevent it from continuing to ripen. Advertisements really do push a lot of juice, and we know, because we've been talking about this quite a bit, our bodies actually don't need juice. Eating the apple is a lot better than drinking the juice, but sometimes we like juice. But what happens to the apple is when they start to heat treat it to get the juice out, it does kill off a lot of that vitamin C that's in there. So we're not going to be getting as much of that nutrition as we would in a fresh apple. The pasteurization of that apple leading to that apple juice removes the majority of those flavonoids, and then because we're not eating the skin, we're going to be losing a lot of the fiber as well. So enjoy juice in small amounts, but enjoy apples in the whole and eat them raw more often. So how do we store them? So we know that in a normal warm environment, they're going to continue to ripen. So we want to keep them in a cooler environment. So if these kind of days are nice and cool, so keeping them in a garage or somewhere out of the sun, maybe on a patio that is out of the sun, when it is cool and it won't freeze. That is the best place. If you have space in your fridge in the crisper drawer where there's not a whole lot of air circulation, that's a great space as well. And then they will keep 2 months, 2 maybe 3 months. You might have to take them out of the plastic because the plastic is going to protect it from some oxygen, but it also will keep the ripening process happening. So sometimes the ones in the middle of the bag will start to go bad first. So when you see an apple go bad, take that out because that is a ripening process and it's going to continue to ripen the ones around it to go bad quickly as well. So take that out and get rid of that so that your other ones, you can still enjoy them. So you might see some apples probably in the grocery store in little packages ready to go to school for the kids, already chopped up. So when they get chopped up and their flesh is exposed to oxygen, it's going to quickly turn brown, especially for these McIntosh apples. The browning happens really quickly. So these apples, the Honeycrisp, the Quarton a little bit, and then the Fuji apples over here, they don't turn brown as fast. So those are a better apple to send to school. Now, what I typically do for my kids when I'm sending it to school is I don't send it whole because, I don't know, they complain about biting into an apple and getting it in their teeth. I think it's so silly. But, so I'll take an apple, this is a good example, and I will cut it on one side of the core and cut it on the other, turn it, and then do the same. And now when it falls apart, so you don't cut it all the way through, you only cut it till about there, when it kind of splays open, you've got 6 individual pieces. And then when you put it in a little Ziploc bag or a container, they can just pop off each piece as they go. And then it doesn't turn as brown as quickly because the pieces are all together like that until they need them. So the other way to keep them from going even more brown is to add something acidic to the cut side. So say you had this apple for snack and you're not wanting to eat it all, and thank you very much, that's a good idea. Maybe you ate like a half of it or a third of it. If you could store the other part flesh side down on a plate, it won't go brown very quickly. However, if you put it into a bag or a container flesh side down and you put some orange juice on the bottom or some lemon juice, that's acidic enough and it will keep it from turning brown, especially that orange juice, and you can just drink that orange juice and then eat the rest of your apple another day. So you can definitely prevent that brownness from happening, but if it does happen, feel free to eat it because it's not going to harm you. So apples come in multiple different flavors, and that is something super great about apples, is that depending on what you want it for or what taste buds you have, you can choose an apple accordingly. So Mary Ann found a fantastic handout that she is sending to you, and it shows the different apples ranging from their sweetness to their tartness. So of course the most sweet apples are your Fuji and your Gala, your apple or your Honeycrisp and your Ambrosia. And then the most tart, of course, is our trusty Granny Smith, which is fantastic in baking because it brings out that really strong tart flavor. The perfect apples for making applesauce or putting apples into like an apple crisp or an apple pie is our McIntosh, as well as our red and yellow delicious fresh. After these sit around a few months, they get a little bit more dry, so then it is just those McIntosh that are the best for when you're cooking and you want kind of mush. Then that is the apple for that. Eat them on their own, and remember, as a snack, it's always 2 different food groups. So a great couple of pairing ideas is an apple plus cheese, that extra old cheddar cheese on the brick, cut that off, super delicious tasting with those apples. Also apples with some sort of nut butter, fantastic, or even just with nuts themselves. Bite of an apple, couple of nuts, and you get a nice pairing. And then of course you can throw them in salads. A Waldorf salad is an example that has apples. You put celery in that, so you have a really nice crunch. You put apples in that, and you put raisins in that, and some walnuts, and then you put some lemon juice over top, and then you have some sort of a creamy dressing. So, and that tart of that Granny Smith apple combined with the sweetness of the raisins, such a delicious combination. And apples also go really good with the vegetable fennel. Fennel tastes a little bit like black licorice, so that combination is pretty amazing when you're looking at a salad as well. And Marianne says you have fennel in the garden. So when we're looking at making applesauce, we really like to just enjoy the flavor of the apples, and using McIntosh apples, you're gonna get a good soft applesauce. And feel free to leave the skins on, right? You just take the core out, chop them into small bits, and then after it's all cooked down, you can just use some little zipper tool or put it in the blender when it's cool, and then just zip those skins there so that you're still gonna get that fiber. Try to enjoy just the flavor of the apples instead of adding anything to it. Because you can purchase, of course, the applesauce that is unsweetened, and it's pretty perfect because every little cup of it is a half of a cup, which is a perfect Canada's Food Guide serving. And often what they call for in a recipe is that half a cup. So you just need one of those. But when you're comparing this to a sweetened kind of applesauce where they add white sugar to it, you're looking at quite a bit of a jump in that the sugar amount, the carbohydrate. So you've got about 11 grams of carbohydrate in an unsweetened applesauce. So that is pure, natural, sweet goodness in there. But when you add sugar, or when you purchase it with added sugar in it, it's usually around 22 grams. So you've doubled it. So that's around 10 grams. So that's actually 2 teaspoons of added white sugar into every one of these. Now, if you're making it at home, you can add a little bit less, but I just say find a sweet apple and add it to it if it's a little bit too tart. So you can add other things like cardamom or cinnamon. Make it of different flavor by adding those spices, not adding any more sugar to it that you don't need. So just learn to enjoy any product that you make with your apples in its natural state and save yourself a good amount of sugar. So there is a lot of things about apples. I hope you learned something new today, and I hope you will try a different kind of apple, and that you'll enjoy a new flavor to the apples in the fall.